I expect a lot of laughs from this one. Uh, no, this is actually something I've been thinking about for a while. There was a This comes from a study from a long time ago that has been taken out of context and warped a bit. But the idea being that it was found that like most the study kind of the conclusion was that most men don't read fiction. Um, Now the validity of the study has been called into question. I've even looked at it myself, and it does seem to be exaggerated to the point where it makes it seem like men don't read fiction, and women read a lot more fiction, and men read way more nonfiction and stuff. So it's a bit clickbaity. So I don't want to. If people are watching this and they're like, "That study's not real," da da da. I get it. It's not it's not 100% accurate at this point. People have kind of poked holes at it. However, the eye test for me in my life, and I look around at a lot of the men that I know, it does ring true for me. I feel like most men that I know, most men don't even read, period. That I know, and when they do, it's usually not a nonfiction book that's been recommended to them by a podcast or something like that. Usually, has some alignment with like a self-help thing or like a hustle culture type thing. And there's just like a severe drought of men reading, specifically like literary fiction versus even like science fiction or fantasy. There's still men reading that. But I guess I was just kind of wondering, just amongst the four of us, like, is reading a thing that you do? And if it is or isn't, like why? Like why are you drawn to the certain things that you do read and not other things? And do you think it's a bad thing that men aren't reading as much as women or just in general?
Who wants to go first? I kind of want to hear Andrew. I feel like he might have some interesting stuff on this.
That was a very fascinating topic when Cooper sent that over, and I hadn't heard about that study. And I think anecdotally, for some reason, I want to like agree that that's like, at least on the surface, appears to be true. I definitely read more nonfiction than fiction, but I also don't have anything inherently against fiction. It's, for me, my reading diet is often tied to work a lot. So it'll be during like research on whatever, stories I'm working on, as will kind of guide the majority of my reading lists. That and food, because I guess that's also attached to the job as well. I don't know why that would be the case. Like, is it that some men view, literary fiction as like not masculine? Is that part of the equation? I don't know.
That is one of the things that they brought up, is that kind of it does, as fiction, specifically literary fiction, has sort of like, there's been a rise of women authors. Fiction has started to become less applicable or less focused on men's experiences, and so it's a natural thing for them to sort of like move away from that and find something that speaks to them, and that's that's fair. I don't know if that's actually true. I think there's still lots of men writing and about men's experiences, but it does seem to be harder to get, because they're not hitting like the top 50 charts as much anymore, right? Like it used to be when it was all men writing pretty much on the charts. It was easy. You could just go walk into chapters and grab the latest book of whatever, and you get it. Now there's a lot more diversity in authors, women authors, gay and lesbian authors, trans authors, whatever it is. There's just a lot more diversity, and so it becomes a little bit more challenging, or you have to put a little bit more effort into finding stuff that kind of aligns with maybe your experience or what you want to read about. So that is definitely does seem to be part of it, for sure.
Yeah. I also like reading to be put into, like see the world through a different perspective than my own. I feel like that is incredibly valuable part of reading, and why everybody should read more and read outside of, I don't know, whatever we want to call it, a quote unquote comfort zone. I know that's, you'd be very surprised what you might find.
That is one thing that I've often wondered about the nonfiction versus fiction is that I've always felt that the strength of fiction is that you can circumvent the part of people's brains that would be immediately resistant to an idea or a thought or a theme, because it's just a story, right? People aren't expecting, if they're reading science fiction or fantasy or even literary fiction, they're reading it for enjoyment, and all of a sudden you hit them with the truth that they have to kind of deal with or reconcile, versus nonfiction, which kind of wears its themes on its sleeve, and it's sort of like you buy that because you want to learn more about this thing. So you already agree with it, or you disagree with it and you want to learn about someone's perspective, right? And so that's always been fascinating to me, because I feel like the more that we move away from fiction, the less likely we are to be surprised by new ideas and thoughts, because nonfiction is sort of just serving them up to us, and we can immediately say, no, I don't want that, or yes, I do want that. Versus the way fiction does it, and it's just like, hey, here's a story about a guy killing a dragon, and all of a sudden there's all these themes that are buried in the DNA of it that you kind of have to reconcile with afterwards. So that's always been the strength of fiction for me. I don't know if that rings true for anybody else here, but that's how I've always kind of viewed it.
I have a theory about why. So, like, in my personal life, I agree that I think most guys I know are reading nonfiction, and I'm almost, I'm exclusively nonfiction for the most part. Even when I was young, I would try to read fiction, and for whatever reason, I just had this weird mental block where I just couldn't. I don't know. Maybe it's weird because I like to think I have a really good imagination. I do a lot of creative work on my own, but when I try to enter someone else's fictional world, my brain has a hard time entering that world. It's a weird block. Whereas when I read nonfiction, if I'm reading about, a biography, or about Apple, I know what Apple is. I know who Steve Jobs is. When they reference IBM or Microsoft, I can picture those things very easily, and it's just very instantaneous. I don't have to. There's no work for me to build the world. I can just enter it, and it just makes sense to me for some reason. So for the longest time, I exclusively read biographies, and now I'm into also just nonfiction. I was looking at up there, the last ones I read was about nuclear war, and this one book called Cobalt Red, which is about like these mines in the Congo where they get all the stuff for like our iPhones and the batteries and all that kind of stuff. And for some reason, like it sounds kind of boring, but the books are amazing. They're very riveting, actually. But I'm able to just picture it because it's about things that are just like the Congo, or like this Russia and the war in North Korea. Like I can picture those things very easily. It just, my brain just jives with it a lot more. But my theory as to why maybe men read more nonfiction is potentially, and this might be controversial to some extent, but I feel like men get their fill of fiction elsewhere. They're playing video games, watching movies, watching TV shows. I know women also do those things, but I feel like men have this weird, deeper stake in those things where they care. I don't know. They seem to care a lot more, where they invest more emotionally in these worlds, like in video games and things like that. I feel like men are experiencing lots of fiction. They're just experiencing it more in those areas, whereas women typically seem to gravitate more to reading novels. I work with a bunch of girls that always, this is all kind of a side tangent too, but they're always talking about they're very open that like the books they read are extremely like X-rated, like smut kind of novels, and they love it's like porn for them essentially, and they're very open about that's why they read it, and they're wrapped in a fictional story. And I feel like there are studies that show that women, they just gravitate more towards text for that kind of thing, whereas men are more visual as well. So I don't know if there's something there where women are just more, they just like fiction more because in a text form it works with their brain or something like that. I don't know, and maybe men it works differently. That in a video game it's more visual and interactive, and that maybe works for them a bit more. But yeah, I don't know that many guys that read, either read at all, or if they do, it's definitely not fiction for whatever reason.
Yeah. Do you agree or disagree that you can get that you've played maybe, or that there are games or movies or TV shows that are providing the same depth of thought that comes from books?
TV shows possibly, like if I, it's rare for me personally that I'm satisfied from a storytelling experience, but I'll use like Breaking Bad as an example. I think that's a great deep dive on like a great character arc for Walter White is one of my favorite character arcs. Joel, like we talked about before in The Last of Us, I think is a great, in the video games, is a great character arc. It's very few and far between. I think TV does allow you to get a little bit more in depth on like the psychology behind a character's motivations and that kind of thing compared to a movie. Movies, I think, are going to be exploring more themes, and they're more superficial. They don't have enough time to explore the ins and outs that a TV show would. But I think movies, you can explore themes and lots of symbolism, that kind of thing. But books probably are the ones that do it the best. But for whatever reason, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just the interactivity or the ease of just like letting a movie wash over you without having to do any work, or interacting with a video game that seems more appealing than a book for some reason. I mean, the last fiction I read was your book, and then that one called Tomorrow. Tomorrow was the last like two that I read. When they're great, but yeah, it's very rare that I would do it.
And there is something to be said too about just the fact that it's kind of the oldest medium, or it is the oldest medium of the ones we're talking about, and it demands your full attention always, versus movies and games and TV shows where you can kind of check your phone, and like our attention spans are basically all at zero at this point, and so it becomes really difficult to just sit down and read. I don't know how many times I'll go to a cafe and I will see a guy who brings a book in to read, and he sits down with his coffee and he opens his book, and within 5 seconds he's like put it down, picked up his phone, scrolling, and you can see the back and forth he's doing with his head, because he's like, oh yeah, I'm here to read this book. So he puts his phone down, turns it over so it's face down, and opens it up again, and after, he'll be there for an hour, because I'm usually there for longer, just writing and stuff. He'll have cracked his book open 10 times, but he'll be on the same page that he started with, and it's because he keeps grabbing his phone or grabbing whatever, and books haven't changed. There's no audiobooks kind of help with that, but I think for the most part they demand so much more effort to enjoy them. That's more of a books in general statement, not in fiction versus nonfiction, but I do think it plays a role in it for sure.
Yeah, active consumption of the story and the content, rather than passive like audio or visual, like film or podcasts or audiobooks even. Like I will not retain information from an audiobook as well as I will retain it actually if I read it.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. I was huge into audiobooks for a while, but then I realized, it didn't feel like the feeling you get when you read when you're holding it and you're reading it. There's a actual literal feeling I get of like, I can almost feel me absorbing the words or something. Whereas when I'm listening to it, I do retain some of it, but definitely less. And it just doesn't feel like I'm reading. Obviously I'm not reading, but like that feeling is important, I think. I don't know it's like an intangible thing I can't really describe, but when I'm reading something, it actually is providing me almost like a different type of hobby high experience than it is when I'm listening to something that I don't know. And it seems very important. And so now I've gone back to buying physical books again.
Yeah, for sure.
And it does seem almost...
I was just going to say, I definitely need to read more, for sure. I love that feeling too, but I don't go to books that often. Anyway.
Yeah, it's hard. It's like they're not convenient.
Yeah.
for sure, right?
But they
But
should be, because you can literally put one in your backpack and open it up anywhere that doesn't run out of batteries. It's like the ultimate portable thing that we could all do. But
any
yeah,
like ebooks and stuff, like on your phone or whatever. It does seem. I often wonder, like all of the biggest podcasts or YouTube shows, or even like late night shows, they all kind of feature, like when an author writes a new nonfiction book that's strikes a chord or is really timely, they do this circuit and they appear on all of these different shows and they recommend all of them. But it's really rare to see a fiction writer, even for a popular series, get like book a spot on these shows. And one of the things that I kind of came to or kind of realize is that there's a lot of nonfiction books that are based on essays. Like the process is usually like someone who has a really good background in this subject will write a great essay, and a publisher will contact them and say, hey, do you want to write a book on that? And so that writer now has to, that subject matter expert now has to expand that into a book. And which is why a lot of times when you read nonfiction, the first quarter or third or half of it will be really good, and then it kind of like tapers off and goes away. It's because it's like a lot of it ends up being fluff that they've added to it. And I think it's easier to talk about a subject and not even read the source material on an interview show. Like if someone's saying like let's say, like, use the nuclear attack one, you can carry a conversation about nuclear warfare without having read the book, just by kind of asking some leading questions and letting the author speak. But if you were to do that about fiction, it becomes really difficult when you haven't read the book, because you can't talk about the beats, the story beats, the themes, the characters. That's what you're going to end up talking about when you talk about fiction. And you can't do that if you haven't read the book. So it becomes just a lot more difficult to even talk about when you're talking to an interviewer who doesn't have time to read your book because they've got 50 other books to read or movies to watch or whatever. The whole thing is just kind of problematic in that sense, in that it's just not easy to talk about fiction and to popularize it in the same way, because you can't talk about it.
I'm even hearing like Colbert's voice in my head right now. He could just sit down like, so nuclear war, it's scary, and that's all he has to say, and then the author could start talking about it. Whereas he can't say like, Philip the Dragon Slayer, go more in depth on you can't even ask a question on that. You'd have to have the author say the whole thing or whatever.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's something that I've been thinking about as a mostly fiction writer, historical fiction. It's something that like is always like kind of on my mind. But I'm curious as to. I don't actually think there's a way to like make men in particular read more, because we're just going to do what we want to do. Like we want to, if this is attractive to us, we'll do it. We're not going to like start reading more just because we think it's a good thing to do. But I do think it's a good thing to do. So I don't know. Yeah. So it's just always something that's kind of on my mind, but just chatting with you guys here about it kind of reinforces some of those ideas. And I'm retiring.
Just
no, it's too bad, but I think the pendulum always swings. I'd like to think that eventually you will see the return of the well-read man, but maybe nuclear warfare will stop all of it anyways. So.
Yeah.
Well, I will make it a point to add some more fiction into my reading diet.
There we go.
Challenge
One
accepted.
down.
Top 10 lifestyle tips from Andrew Tate. Let's do it. Let's go.